in a world where distributed work is becoming ever more prevalent, how do we create a platform that helps to create the best of these both worlds? So all the flexibility and gains for business and gains personally through sort of more flexible remote work, but also this balance of getting together, learning together, and connecting together as well. It's incredibly complex, the world of work we now live in. Like the old world was, Dolly Parton, 9 to 5, everyone knew what they were doing, happy days. Although it wasn't really happy days. What we talk about in the future of work is the future of teams, because it can get very individual, right? It's like, here's me, I'm here in my desk room, which has all the benefits for myself. But how do you keep that kind of team layer going as well, so that you're actually achieving and tackling those big problems together?
Welcome back to Talent Hunters, powered by MRI Network, where each week we talk with the world's top talent strategists and executive recruiters. If you want to build talented teams that drive your company to big goals and big growth, then this podcast is for you. And now, let's join the conversation with today's episode of Talent Hunters.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Vince Holt, and I'm the host of Talent Hunters. Today we've got Sophie Bailey, co-founder and CEO of WorkTripp, located in and around Bristol, England. Sophie has spent the last 17 years in many scenarios working with people all over the world, helping leaders learn how to communicate with their teams. Over the last couple of years, Sophia's focus has been on bringing teams together with a little different kind of experience. Welcome, Sophia.
Thank you very much for having me, Vince. I'm very excited to be here and chat to you today.
Well, thank you for being here. So let's start this thing out with you telling us a little bit about your background and really what's got you to this point in your career journey.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if I go way back, I grew up on a place made famous by a Beatles song. So I grew up on a place called the Isle of Wight. It was very remote. It's an island off the south coast of England. And then I left there around 17, 18 to actually spend 7 months in the Sarawakian jungle in Borneo. So, and then scroll forward after university, I spent the next 10 years launching and coming up with event ideas and then launching those in different countries around the world. So I was sort of reflecting on what that means. And I think it's that I've always had this mix of the remote and an interest in human connection. And that's really been part of my DNA as I've kind of gone through life. So that's kind of like deep within me as a sort of person and how I go about my business. And then career-wise, so first 10 years, as I mentioned, was an event producer, an event director. So understanding what different industry communities want and needed in terms of how to connect and share ideas and kind of trade and do business as we've done throughout human history, and launching those. So, if I give you one example in the telecom sector, that was a telecoms event in Barcelona in Spain. And then we launched that in Dallas, actually, and then over in the Middle East and, many different locations. So that was a great experience in terms of entrepreneurial training, because you are understanding the market need. You are essentially going for investment, whether that's internal investment. You are kind of building out your ecosystem with partners and contextualizing and localizing how you go to market in these different areas. So that was the first 10 years of my career, and I can kind of go on to how I got to WorkTripp. But following that, I mean, it's interesting in the context of remote work, because I remember exactly when we were given laptops, and, it was like, you must remember to bring these back into the office the next day. Like, you get to go home with them. And, the idea was starting to percolate. Well, hang on, why do we have to come into the office if we get to live and work with these anywhere? And this was, gosh, I don't know, like, early 2000s, I think. anyway, so scroll forward to 2014. I had my first child. I was on maternity leave, and I was listening to a podcast actually in the realm of education technology, which was the event that I was putting together then. So we had like 35,000 attendees. It was a very big event. And whilst I was on maternity leave, I wanted to keep up to date with everything that was happening in that space so that when I went back to work, I was like fully up to speed with everything. I'm sure my son was asleep at this point. I wasn't just completely ignoring him. And yeah, and so I started to think, well, hang on, there's a space in the market for a podcast around this topic. And so, long story short, I quit my job, my well-paid job, which did entail commuting an hour each way, and wasn't that flexible around the needs of my now young family. And I set up a podcast, and then I grew that as a business for 5 years, which was amazing. Came out to South by Southwest, moderated events on AI in education in Beijing. So super interesting. And my first taste of running my own business. And essentially, as we all know, we had the pandemic, and the pandemic showed us, yes, all of this online world is amazing. It democratized access to, continue schooling, for us to continue working. But we all felt this, some feeling of this isn't everything. And, we missed our human connection in person. The children missed that sort of pastoral element to schooling and everything. And that really sparked the idea of WorkTripp. So in a world where distributed work is becoming ever more prevalent, how do we create a platform that helps to create the best of these both worlds? So, all the flexibility and gains for business and gains personally through sort of more flexible remote work, but also this balance of getting together, learning together, and connecting together as well. And so, the entrepreneurial bug bit again, and that was a few years back. So that was how I got here.
So, would you mind going into a little bit of detail of what the mission of WorkTripp is all about, and really what's your goal for the participants that want to be a part of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the mission really is, we talk about connecting 2,000 teams by 2028 and becoming the sort of go-to platform for what will be the largest leadership group in Gen Z going forward. So really creating a platform for them to deliver distributed work at scale that, has all of those benefits, but doesn't have to sacrifice how we connect as well. And the sort of underlying trend beneath that is the fact that, we know that cohort or demographic are driven by meaningful and purposeful work. They're willing to give up sort of 7 to 10% of their salary to actually have more flexible work. But they're also very hungry and aware for self-development. And they're aware that they are working at a time when job security is not what it used to be, and the need to continually upskill is really important. And so our mission is to really enable this new cohort of leaders to do that to the level that we see new unicorn companies doing that. So, for example, your Atlassians, your Dropbox, your NVIDIA having a tough time at the moment, but ultimately, this is like a new generation of companies that are achieving billion-dollar status and attracting really fantastic talent whilst embracing this sort of distributed model of work that then also counterbalances that with really fantastic and quality offsites. So our mission is to get that style of leadership into as many leaders' hands as possible.
So I know you've just been starting WorkTripp over the last few years. What are the obvious challenges that you're coming across, and how are you dealing with those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we are early stage. So we set up first proper year really was, and just for your listeners to be aware, I'll take a step back and explain a little bit about what we are so we can kind of contextualize that a bit. But so WorkTripp operates essentially at its core as a marketplace business. So we connect typically COOs in scale-up companies with really fantastic offsite delivery partners. So if I give you an example there, it might be a mental health AI company or a VR company, or even actually a venture capital company, all of which are very aware of recruitment and retention challenges. So they want to really develop this sense of distinct culture in their organizations. But they are super busy. They are scaling like crazy. Suddenly the complexity of their business has gone up, and they are trying to make sure that they don't sacrifice this need to connect whilst also doing their other work. So having a platform that can help them sort of save time, ensure quality in this delivery, and actually have guidance in order to do a good job is of value to them. And how we deliver that is we have this marketplace. So we have 700 users. We got going in March 23. Half of those users are prospective customers and half are like amazing venues set in nature, so outside of the core cities, but close to sort of tech hubs, fantastic executive facilitators and coaches as well. So if I were to kind of reflect as a marketplace founder, you have what is called this cold start problem. So some of your listeners may be familiar with a guy called Andrew Chen. He was, at Uber. He wrote this book called The Cold Start Problem. And this is the same going back to events, to be honest. It's constantly balancing this supply and demand and making sure that they are really well matched. So that's something that you're constantly thinking about. How do we get those best partners? How do we reach our customers? And we've kind of hacked a few really good ways along the way for both sides of the marketplace. The second challenge I would say actually is we are both non-technical founders, and the demand for technical expertise is very high, as we know. But because we are sort of purpose-driven, we're a B Corp, all the things that we advocate through WorkTripp, so we work remotely, we come together quarterly at least, means that we've been really lucky in terms of the talent that we can kind of bring into the business. But that is top of mind. Like I've just come back today from an AI event in London. So keeping on top of the changes there, which aren't just technical, actually start to affect things like pricing models and things like that. So but I'm a bit of a sucker for an interesting problem. So keep coming.
Well, so if I can dumb it down to me, okay, you're teaching leaders how to communicate with their people. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. I think, yes, that is it. I think, the top problems that our customers come to us with is they want to increase. So if I put it into what's out there currently and how we do things differently, if I'm a COO and I want to get my team together because perhaps I have a team in 12 countries, ultimately what's out there is organized around the logistics. So how do I book a venue? It's very transactional, it's very one-off. But if we're moving to a world that is more hybrid in nature over the longer term, actually having data on what works in which context for which companies in which industry verticals becomes very interesting, because I can sort of benchmark how I'm doing against other peers in the sector. And so from the outset, we really wanted to be very goal orientated and help leaders and COOs and others within organizations to be able to make more informed decisions about how they connect their teams. And the top things that come up, so we ask these questions when leaders are using our platform, is connection and belonging. So having a better sense of connection and belonging, and a better sense of sort of planning and looking ahead. And so really it's that fundamental issue of trust and alignment. How do you keep this sense of trust going, especially when you're working distributed? Or, for example, you may have just gone through an M&A. These are typical things that come up again and again. And how do you keep everyone aligned? Again, if you're working in distributed mode, and there are best practices here, but what we do with WorkTripp is we help the customers to sort of understand where they are, what decisions to make, and basically cut down the time it's needed to kind of make these decisions. So whether that's the actual offsite program, what are you doing when you go away? What's the content? How do you make sure that it's not, 50 to 100 grand that actually makes things worse? Because offsites can have an incredibly bad rap if they're done, without thinking deeply or without the best intentions even. So, so that's how we go about things.
What's interesting is HireQuest just came out with a white paper.
Okay.
Don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but it's truly been dealing with the trilemma of people returning to an office mandate, to the remote work and the hybrid. What's your observation with the troubles that companies are dealing with right now, knowing there's 3 different channels out there and what works best?
Yeah, well, first thing I would say is, no judgment for anyone listening, because it's incredibly complex, the world of work we now live in. Like the old world was, Dolly Parton, 9 to 5, everyone knew what they were doing, happy days, although it wasn't really happy days. And I think what I would pose is, when teams are more engaged, they can be 21% more profitable. So, some of your business leaders will be worried about that because, ultimately that's the bottom line and that's the kind of pressure point within business. And, I think it's really important to talk about happiness and joy at work. But we also know the language of sometimes other stakeholders in the business and just kind of bringing it back down to the fact that, when our teams are engaged, which often they're not, when they are engaged, that really affects the bottom line. And for an average team of 150, I think that increase in engagement, whether that's saving costs on recruitment or retention, actually like greater output due to being more engaged, or less sick days, there's a potential upside of sort of £700,000 in GBP for a team of around 150 people. So it's really significant. There are a lot of headlines out there, and I think it's super fascinating. And just keeping reading and tracking it is the best thing, and asking those critical questions. Obviously, at the time of recording this, Amazon have, with great fanfare, asked their employees to come back to the office. I think, look, you've got like the big tech companies who basically can do what they want, frankly. They kind of operate in their own world. They are able to give world-class salaries, shares that are incredibly valuable. I think where it becomes interesting is the sort of 72% of businesses that are set up either remote or hybrid going forward. And where you are trying to compete over talent, how you differentiate outside of the sort of Amazons of this world is quite interesting. And there's a couple of factors there. Yes, you might have an office. If that office isn't being used, if you're, paying like potentially like 100 grand a month for an office, and you can see that it's being underutilized, and then actually you can flip to a more lean approach to sort of flexible desk passes and multiple offsites for your team who happen to be in 12 countries. We know from our customers that this is the kind of conversation that is happening. So there's a sort of a bottom-up trend, which is the sort of the needs of new leaders coming through, which, they want that flexibility. They do want that connection, but they don't want it every day. And I say this as broad statements because obviously there are, people sit along that line, absolutely. And then the top-down pressures are, okay, look, we've got all this technology, we've got AI, we can access global talent. That can be cheaper sometimes, and it can allow us to kind of progress more quickly. And we are operating in difficult economic times. So if we can save some money and be more operationally lean, then there's that element at play as well. And then, a sort of parting comment on the Amazons and the Nikes and the RTOs is, I do think there's something very interesting about the stage of business. And, you've got the sort of survival mindset of leadership and the adaptive mindset of leadership. And it feels very much like these more mature businesses who were once market disruptors. And don't get me wrong, they have all the resources and the brains to continue disrupting. But obviously now they're in that mode where they can continue to generate incredible returns for their shareholders. And so some of that hesitancy to do things differently might creep in, for example. So, I think it's fascinating. I don't think distributed work as a trend is going anywhere. Like this year, Harvard Business Review and the World Economic Forum released sort of multiple offsites as one of their work trends for 2024. And so, I think as with everything, you'll have like the boom and bust and how that affects retention, recruitment, who has the power between, relatively speaking, between employers, employees. But I'm still quite bullish on, the market opportunity and our ability to support our customers, which is the most important thing.
Well, I think you're going down a path that needs to be gone down because COVID truly did disrupt the entire world and the work habits of everybody. You've touched a little bit, actually quite a bit, on retention. Obviously, that you mentioned in our opening about there doesn't seem to be the job security that used to be. So job security is wavering. Retention is paramount in leadership's mind. What are you hearing out there that people are striving to create the solution to the retention problem? Because I see it as accountability and the desire for people to want to achieve, not the leadership, the people that they hire. So we need to have good hiring. And if people are remote, how do they get trained properly to be able to reach the achievement that they want and maintain the retention that leadership would like to have? I don't understand how we can come together with that, which is, quite frankly, your challenge.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's kind of partly why I set up WorkTripp, because as I mentioned before, so the podcast was all around educational technology, which touches on, how we learn, intrinsic motivation, how we sort of social learning environments, all of this stuff. And you see this trend in the corporate edtech space as well. So, the fact that sort of peer-to-peer learning can really help embody and entrench some of this. So the idea that we individualistically can sort of take on learning and we're like, okay, I've ticked all the boxes and done all of that. We know it. We just know that doesn't work. So I think that's a really interesting challenge. But again, the flip side of that is going into the office every day. How often was it working in the office as well? So the office isn't just like the flip answer. And neither is bad training and neither is bad content, because we have an absolute abundance of content, and now AI can surface that content really effectively. I think what it comes down to is new leaders coming through, like you say, they want to be onboarded really effectively. So they want to know that actually I get to spend time and understand how this organization works, how whether it's a flat hierarchy or more traditional, who are the decision makers here? How do I basically orientate myself in this thing? And then, with the kind of content, if you're going to have that, having it very at the point of need, very micro content, but more importantly, people love to learn from one another as well. And I fully take on, there are different aspects of that with neurodiversity. And so adapting for that, absolutely. And we actually looked at this problem from the point of collaborating with a content delivery partner around new leaders content. So really fantastic audio content for new leaders, and then having cohorts of new leaders come to offsites and really kind of embed, because we know half of that is the support. And we know from a retention point of view, if you have a fantastic friend at work, you stay for longer. If you hate your boss, which is one of the top reasons for leaving, you don't stay for longer. So I think just these moments and the sort of intentional time in the annual calendar to, have that mix of social relationship building and strategic, whether that's upskilling or actually planning and looking ahead, but doing that with sort of strategic partners is so important. And that's where we really try and guide is, at this point, do you need to be doing OKRs, or do you actually need to be doing loads of work on whether your team really deeply know one another and how they work together? So that's really kind of the guidance that we try and deliver through WorkTripp. And then, some examples of that are we had sort of a mental health AI company. They just closed around. They were scaling, and they came away recently, and they were building out their 2-year strategy. So the chance to sort of get everyone together, sit down, really focus on what that looks like, but spend some time together outside of whether they have an office or not, in a different environment, with a facilitator to help sort of really guide that process. And we actually are able to sort of share the return on investment metrics, their success metrics for them against against their original goals of why they wanted to go away. So rather than it just being hey, here's some money, here's a venue, here's some bedrooms, really tie all of this activity to sort of the team performance. And just to finally talk about that, what we talk about in the future of work is the future of teams, because it can get very individual, right? It's here's me, I'm here in my desk room, which has all the benefits for myself, but how do you keep that kind of team layer going as well, so that so that you're actually achieving and tackling those big problems together. So that's what we get quite obsessed about, frankly.
So I know it hasn't been a long period since you started WorkTripp, but is there any victory that really stands out, an accomplishment that really stands out that motivates you moving forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's, you've always got to celebrate the small wins for sure. So I'm a big fan of small wins. For me, I think the thing I've been most proud about is actually the talent that we've been able to secure into WorkTripp, because we are small. And whether that was interesting investors in the early stages, or whether it was the customers and the partners that we've worked with who tap us right into the sort of scale up ecosystem, or I started WorkTripp on my own and I was able to go and find a fantastic co-founder, or our amazing developer Alina, or head of product Raquel. I think there's real joy in sort of setting out what you're trying to achieve, and then finding those amazing people with all of their myriad experiences and bringing them in. I personally find that really thrilling. And I think it sort of probably harks back to events. You start with nothing. You literally start with an idea and you create something out of nothing. So, I every step of that's been really amazing. I think, we had our sort of first year goals, and every time we tick those off, so whether it was, 200 accounts opened, or, building out our delivery partners, or getting our B Corp status, all of that stuff. I think being able to sort of tick off the things that we'd set out to do was really satisfying as well. So long may it continue.
What would you like to say to the audience about WorkTripp that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I think, look, we absolutely, don't have all the answers. One of our values is we guide, you decide. So we want to really be a partner to companies and teams out there that are seeking how to connect their teams in a way that drives better team performance, that does have that sort of sense of authentic leadership. We're not all stuck in this really stuffy conference room. We're speaking together as sort of real people and achieving together. So yeah, I would say I would love to, if anyone's interested, what I'm talking about resonates. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Sophie Bailey. I'd love to hear from people. We are going through a funding round as we speak. So should that be interesting to people, come and chat to us. I'm always open to learning from others. And actually something that we're going to do is release a report, which is we take on some quite interesting information from our customers in terms of like the regularity of when they're doing these offsites, how big they are, what budget they spend on them, how many days they go away, and what those ultimate goals are for getting together. So look out for that, because I think, on both sides, it's quite interesting just to kind of see what everyone else is up to as well.
What's interesting, Sophia, is as you were just describing that last little bit, you struck me as a psychologist. You're getting together with, you mentioned, we don't have all the answers. Psychologists never volunteer answers. They really guide, they find out from, in your case, the leadership, what they're dealing with, what their problems are, what they want to accomplish. And then you're finding out from their people what their problems are, what they want to accomplish, and you're pushing them to communicate with each other about a solution.
Yeah. I think you've just come up with a new podcast, which is where you interview people with your amazing kind of vantage point, in terms of dealing with people. And then you work out what they currently do, you listen to them, and then you offer them, like, here's the next role. I think that would be awesome.
I know. Well, Sophia, I got to tell you, I've thoroughly enjoyed the time I've spent with you. You've opened my eyes. You've got an ability to be able to deal worldwide. And that's got to be challenging in its own right, because different parts of the world deal in business in different ways. To your point, Amazon, all over the world is going to be different. And it's a huge challenge, but what you're bringing to the party is truly the simplicity of let's just communicate. And that's brilliant. It really is. Thank you for spending the time with us today.
Well, thank you, Vince. It's been a joy to get to know you. And I look forward to listening to this when it comes out.